Hello everyone and welcome to another really wonderful game from the olden days. You guys enjoyed yesterday's game so much I decided to throw in another one. We will have the Tata Steel in a few days, so let's check out a few classics while we're at it. It's a game from the 1922 tournament in Teplitz-Schönau between Richard Reti and Heinrich Wolf. Richard Reti really doesn't need any introduction. I mean, if you're into chess, he is one of the strongest players of the early 20th century. He could defeat anyone, and he has proven that many times. If you study theory, of course, you know about the Reti opening. It's hard to be in modern chess without knowing the name Reti. Even Capablanca, who went undefeated for 8 years, suffered his first loss in the 1924 tournament of New York to none other than Richard Reti. So he was just a monster. I mean, he could crush anyone. And here his opponent is Heinrich Wolf. We don't know much about Heinrich, and we haven't had the pleasure of having him on the channel so far. But interestingly, he is known as the world's first second. That's a weird thing to say, I know, but you know, chess is weird like that. Sometimes seconds in chess are players who assist someone who is fighting for the title. So Magnus will have seconds when he faced against Nepo or against Caruana or against Karyakin. They also had seconds, and they helped them prepare. And Heinrich Wolf was one of the seconds that Emanuel Lasker chose for his 1908 match against Zigbert Tarash, and I think alongside Alapin, and yeah, I mean that's pretty big thing, being the first like that. But also he was a very strong player, but not at the level of, for example, Richard Reti in those days. So this game makes it all the more interesting as something really awesome happens. So let's check it out, and then we're going to discuss stuff a little bit more. So Reti with the white pieces opens with pawn to d4. Sorry, that's an e-pawn, pawn to d4. We have pawn to d5. Interestingly, he does not go for the Reti opening. We have c4, e6, and now knight to c3. So standard queen's gambit declined. We have knight to f6, bishop to g5, and bishop to e7, much like you would see in a modern game. We have e3, castles, and now knight to f3. And we have knight b to d7, rook to c1, and now c6, closing the center here. Nowadays, you would see something like bishop to d3, a3 is also playable. Queen to c2, also very popular nowadays, is what Reti goes for. We have a6 and now c5, and c5 a bit of an anti-positional move, especially in those days. Nowadays you can play anything really, and since white abandoned the struggle for the center, white is now allowing black to attack the center with moves like e5 or b6. b6 seems a bit more natural because you have control over the b6 square, but that's exactly why this game is so interesting and why Heinrich Wolf is such a great player. He plays e5 here, which is a pawn sacrifice, but not really. In order to keep the pawn, you would have to perform miracles here. So d captures on e5, and now knight to g4. And okay, he's going after the e5 pawn. He's going to win back. Bishop captures on e7. Queen captures on e7. And now okay, this position was reached once again after this game. A year after George Allen Thomas played it against Geza Marozzi. Here he played bishop to d3, but as Marozzi was a stronger player, he was able to win this with the black pieces. But here we have knight to a4, and it is now, as of move 12, that this position has never been reached again. Okay, you have additional support over the c5 pawn. You are planning to put the knight on b6 if black recaptures on e5, and your knight on b6 will be fairly strong. So here we have rook to e8, not going for the e5 pawn right away. Wolf wants to continue developing. And now bishop to d3, putting pressure on this h7 pawn. And here, interestingly, you should give up the h7 pawn. It was not played in the game. Maybe it's a bit too much to ask, but you're never in any real danger. For example, if you go knight d captures on e5, bishop captures on h7, which would be a terrible move, a game-losing move, if you will. Let's say king to f8, and now you have to move the bishop back, otherwise g6 will just trap the bishop. So let's say bishop to d3, now comes knight captures on f2, and white's entire position falls apart. Everything is hanging, but it's very similar to what actually happens in the game. So after bishop to d3, h6 was played, so he stops this, and now you should consider many things, one of them being pawn to e6. It's kind of the only move that allows white to continue fighting here. Not easy to spot and not easy to decide on this move. The one thing it does is that if black captures with the f-pawn, you no longer have to worry about the queen-rook battery along the e-file, and if queen captures, then queen is now in the range of the white knight. So now you will castle, and now after knight d to e5, you can play knight to d4, attacking the queen, and all of a sudden white's position comes alive completely. For example, queen e7, now knight comes to b6, attacks the rook, or you don't even have to play it right away. You can go bishop h7, check, king to h8, and now knight to b6. You attack the rook. After the rook moves, now you play bishop to f5, and white has so much control over all of the squares inside black's camp. It's I mean, it's beautiful, really. For example, bishop captures, knight captures, and white is having a great position. Also, the knight here prevents queen from coming to h4. But okay, in the game, after this h6 move was played, we have knight to d4 right away, sort of preparing e6, but of course, black will not allow this. After knight to d4, we have knight captures on e5, and now knight to b6, attacking the rook on a8. And it's very similar to what we were discussing, but well, it's not really. So feel free to pause the video and try to figure out what Reti missed here while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting this, well, 10 move brilliancy. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is of course knight captures on f2, similar to the position we discussed, because now there's no good move for white. You could capture with the queen, you could capture with the king, or you could ignore capturing altogether. What happens if king captures? Well, look at this, knight to g4 with check, and now either knight captures on e3 will finish you. For example, if king f1, knight captures on e3, check picks up the queen on c2, or if you play something like king to e1, now queen captures on e3, and white is without a move. Of course, if you try to block with queen to e2, queen captures on c1 will be checkmate. There is no escaping that. The queen cannot move, the king cannot reach the f2 square. So after this knight captures on f2, you cannot capture with the king. What happens if queen captures? Well, then the bishop is left unguarded. Just knight captures on d3, check with a monster fork, and here you resign. So, of course, after knight captures on f2, bishop to h7 check was played. It is the only move white has to keep on fighting. King to h8, and now, again, how do you continue? The bishop can't just stay there. If you play, you could play queen captures on f2. That's perfectly fine. You give up the bishop on h7. Now you castle, and after black saves the rook, okay, the game continues. Let's say queen to c2 check, g6, and now let's say rook c to e1, f5. Sorry, f5, and black has a spectacular position, a beautiful knight here. The pawns are marching forward, not much to worry about here. But also it would be the best way for white to defend. Here, however, white castled, and now the real problem starts. Look at this, knight f to g4. Again, you are going after the e3 pawn, and also you're preparing queen to h4 to go after queen to h2. So what can white do here? Not all that much, it would seem. White captures the rook. It's a good move as any. Knight captures on e3 now. It seems like black is just going to win back some material. We have queen to e2, and now knight captures on f1. So white is not in a rush to recapture on f1. The knight really has no escape, so better save the bishop on h7 from being captured by the king. So bishop back to b1. Now black plays knight captures on h2. Very nicely done by Mr. Wolf. And now if king captures, look at this, queen to g5, going after knight to g4 check, and that's just game. If you move the queen to avoid losing the queen, still knight to g4 check, king to g1, queen to e3 with check, and now after, let's say, king h1, knight to f2 check, and you resign here. So after knight captures on h2, knight to b6 was played, getting the knight back into the game, maybe hoping to eliminate one of the possible attackers, but now knight e to f3 with check. And now, if knight captures, then you blunder the queen on e2. So your only other option is to capture with the g-pawn. Moving the king also isn't all that impressive. For example, if king to h1, now you can play knight to g4. And now, again, how do you defend? doesn't really matter what you do. You could even trade queens with queen captures on e7, but look at this, knight to f2 checkmate. Everything is just falling apart here for white. So after knight e to f3 with check, black said, all right, I can't capture with the queen, I can't really move the king, let's play g captures on f3. But now comes queen to g5 with check. It seems like you are losing your queen, but what about queen to g2? Can you just block the black queen like this? Not really, because the rook on c1 is also hanging. So queen to g2 would be met with a simple queen captures on c1 check. Even you can capture the knight on h2, but now queen to f4 with check. And the queen-rook combo is just too strong. Also, the knight on d4 is hanging, but if queen to g3, you can simply go for queen to d2 with check, king to h1, and queen captures on d4. Seems like, okay, maybe white can defend, let's say knight captures on c8, but, sorry, not a rook, just queen to d1 with check, and now you win the white queen. Rook to e2 with check, king h3, queen to h1 with check, king g4, and now rook to g2 will win the white queen. So after queen to g5 check, king captures on h2 was played, you have to give up the queen, and now Wolf grabs the queen. Rook captures on e2, knight captures on e2, but now also queen to e5 with check. Interestingly, the knight when captured on e2 defended the rook, so you can't capture the rook, but not, just queen to e5 with check. Okay, now you connect with the knight, but now the knight moves, knight to g3 blocks the black queen, and if the position remains, white definitely has compensation for the queen. The problem is there's queen captures on b2 check, and now you have to part with either rook or the bishop. Of course, you're gonna give up the bishop, queen captures on b1, and now rook to e2. And okay, it's queen and knight for a rook, maybe you can still play this. Bishop to e6, stopping any back rank checks, and now pawn to f4, hoping to get f5 in. For the moment, it's impossible because the queen and the bishop are preventing that, but just g6. Wolf says, you are not having any counterplay this game. I am very sorry to inform you of that. So Reti, of course, will not resign. He goes knight to a8. He will still try something. Pawn to h5, just going for h4. Knight to c7, h4. And now after knight to h1, just queen to d3, going after the rook here, rook to f2, and now bishop to f5. And it was in this position on move 32 that Richard Reti resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. The problem is you can't even make one move. It's very hard to imagine a move you can make, like if you move the rook away from the f-file, queen to, the rook doesn't really have all that many squares where you can move it to, but let's say you make a single move, just queen to h3 check, and that's all there is. You couldn't stop that even if you wanted to, like king g1, bishop e4 now threatens the knight, and if rook to h2, just queen to g4 check, king f2, and now the queen-bishop combo will be more than white can handle. Now the rook is hanging, you have to defend the rook, now queen to e3 check, king to f1, let's say bishop to d3 check, king to g2, and now of course queen to e4 with check, king h3, and after bishop f1 check, you have no more squares. You have to block with the rook, bishop captures, king somewhere, and now you will get checkmated. So a lot of moves, but basically it's, a very simple moves that of course everyone will find. Very nicely done by Heinrich Wolf, taking down one of the strongest players of the era, Richard Reti, like this. And it's not like Reti had a bad tournament or anything. He even won the tournament very nicely. Here you can see, sorry about that. Here are the standings of the tournament, of the 1922 tournament in Teplitz-Schönau. Reti won shared first place with Rudolf Spielmann. So if anything, he managed to ruin Reti's clear first place by winning this game. But okay, Reti had 2 losses in this tournament. He also lost to last place Paul Joner. So those were his 2 losses in the tournament. But look at the monsters in this tournament. Reti, Spielmann, Savili Tartakvar, Ernst Grumfeld, Akiba Rubinstein, Borislav Kostic, Richard Teichmann, Karl Trebal, Heinrich Wolf, Geza Maroci, Zigbert Taraš, Friedrich Semisch, Jacques Mises, Paul Joner. All names, you could not play modern chess without mentioning those names, and the opening ideas that you are using as basically those guys were there when they were founded. So yeah, I mean, absolutely incredible. But yeah, also I forgot to mention in that 1924 tournament in New York, where Reti defeated Capablanca, breaking his 8-year undefeated streak, also cost Capablanca dearly. I think Emmanuel Lasker won the tournament a point and a half ahead of Capablanca, so he didn't ruin Capablanca's chances of beating Lasker to first place, but it definitely meant much. Lasker won it ahead of Capablanca and Alechin. And yeah, Reti also, in the same tournament, he defeated Capablanca and Alechin. So, I mean, absolute monster of a player, which makes Heinrich Wolf's victory in this game against Reti definitely one to show your friends in the bar and the library. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it and that you've learned a little bit about attacking. If you play such positions. I would like to thank 1984, DWW, Simon Johnson, Ravishing Reptiles YouTube, and Francisco Mosoko for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.